Okay, so we're going to go slightly whimsical here and talk about something in a little more in the work-life situation for a lot of us. So I personally work from home for a significant amount of time. A decent amount of my team does as well. Recently, there was a bit of a dust-up in the news about one of the companies who's actually usually well represented here changing their work-from-home policy. And Mr. Underwood and Dr. Prairie here decided that they wanted to explore how they felt that was working in the industry in general. And so Todd, has a lot of experience here. Beth is a gynecologist, and so you'll find that that may not be directly relevant here. If any of you do need a gynecologist, though, I highly recommend her. I'd like to think if I ever needed a gynecologist, I would call Beth. Thankfully, I don't think I will need one. And Todd is an SRE, which in this case will stand for Sand Removal Engineer at Google. So Todd and Beth.
Oh, wow, dude, technology.
All right, are we on?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for that great introduction, Pumpkin. We really appreciate it. We're happy to be here today.
Excellent. So, what was the company that you were referring to?
Not sure.
Huh. We'll have to get into that in a second. So we wanted to take a look at a touchy subject. This is touchy in the way that claiming that not everybody has to travel business class all the time is touchy, because people who really want to do the thing they want to do feel put upon when you tell them what works about it and what doesn't. But in particular, we wanted to look at what we actually know about how this stuff works. And specifically, we wanted to figure out under what circumstances it works for us here, geeks and technologists as workers, but also for the infrastructures and the systems that we build. So we'll introduce some terminology. We'll try to convince you care. If we fail to succeed that we convince you care, just start the break early. There's probably coffee, and they've been setting out the food early, so feel free to wander out. We don't really need you anyway. We can talk here without you. You guys are entirely superfluous. We'll talk about our biases. We'll talk about what we know about remote work and what we don't know, and a few counterintuitive things. We'll try to do a brief survey of what a bunch of companies do, and then we'll look at some strategies for making remote work successful.
So just to go over the terminology really quickly. So work from work is what we all know. You have an office, desks, and if you're really lucky, you have a coffee machine. Working from home is really two cases. You can be local with the same city, same time zone, same country as your team, or you can be remote in a different place. Then there's work from remote, which is working from a different office of the same company, but remote from wherever your primary team is. Distributed teams are where there's no office for the primary team at all. Everybody's either working from home or working from remote. The really important thing to remember, especially when we talk about the data in this, is that people don't differentiate well between work from home, remote, distributed teams, and everything else. So when we talk about this, remember that all that people really mean when they are presenting data, writing papers, doing research is either you're in an office or you're something else.
And that's going to be important as we look at these cases, because you lot are going to try to distinguish, but my team is in the following way. The data don't distinguish that. And one of the things we're going to find is that the data are less good than we wish they were. So why do you care? The main reason you care is that there was recent contrived media controversy or controversy for the Brits among you. That's probably actually the only reason you all care. But why you should care is that smart people want to work wherever the hell they live, right? People like being productive. Companies like smart people who work for them to get a lot of work done and be cheap, right? And people are cheaper in Detroit than they are in Santa Clara. And this, or in Jersey City. No, that's a little bit more expensive than Detroit. Okay, that's fine. And this impacts technology workers primarily. A lot of the research on this is about salespeople, is about call center, but we're specifically trying to look at technology workers. And the other reason you guys care is that the infrastructure for work from home has been changing pretty substantially. 10 years ago, people were like, IRC, AIM and a phone call. And now, there's virtual meetings, there's GoToMeeting, there's virtual desktop sharing and presentation sharing. Some people use Google Hangouts or Skype, right? And the bandwidth requirements keep going up and the technology requirements keep going up. So let me talk about our backgrounds so that you know our biases. One of the reasons I think Dave and the program committee were happy to have me involved in this is because I've done all sides of this. So when we lived in New Hampshire, I was chief technology officer of a New Mexico-based ISP. So on the systems and network engineering side, that was awesome because IRC, and that's fine, right? On the executive management, business and product management side of it, it was downright abysmal. People were like, how did you not know we were going to sell that product line to this other company? We talked about it in the hallway 2 weeks ago. That's fantastic. So that part was mediocre overall. At Renesas, I was there for about 6 years. Most of the team was distributed. So although the headquarters was in New Hampshire, the teams that I work with, the systems engineering and the network engineering teams, were in, 5 countries and 9 cities or something. And it was fine, right, because IRC. Again, because IRC. But the executive management stuff, again, was fine when I was local. When I moved to Pittsburgh, it worked less well. Google's a very, very different circumstance, and it's been widely reported. Google has an almost universal work from work practice. That's not the policy, but the practice is almost everybody works in the office almost all the time. But really, really great offices. Some people have crappy commutes. I am not one of them because I live in a sensible city, and you too could live in a sensible city. So that works. Oh, Joe's cranky. Sorry, Joe. I didn't make Boston suck. It's not my fault. Oh. Or California. So that works pretty well, but it obviously has some downsides. Beth, on the other hand, has noted that gynecology is not particularly amenable to remote work. It's not clear to me why that's the case, but Carnegie Mellon has some good robotics engineers working on pieces of that, so we'll get in. I'm not kidding. The remote surgery stuff is going to be amazing because they start with the surgeons in the adjacent room, and it's going to be the surgeons in the adjacent time zone, not terribly far from now. And there's some latency things that I'm working on a lightning talk for this afternoon. We'll talk about the latency impacts of that. So the research stuff. So Beth does a bunch of research. I'm like, research? It's about reading things and thinking and writing. That can be done anywhere, right? There's all these pieces of paper, and they're all like, we have these pieces of paper. We have to be with our paper. It's in a place, in a drawer, and we open it up and take things out of it. It's really weird. But anyway, that apparently is not amenable to remote work as well. I'm confused as to why.
So here are just some sort of images for you to think about when you think about what people's work environments look like. This is my work from home research environment. You can see behind my castle, there are some boxes there that are full of my pieces of paper to which I'm very attached. And I just have a simple little desk, not a lot of distraction. There's an elliptical machine. I have a nice view of the trees out of my windows.
The key element here is the castle, and you too could have a castle at your work environment. But the castle does not come decorated. You need children to decorate it for you, but those can be rented.
We can provide those for you.
Indeed. So working from work, it's productive, right? It's great. This is my work from work environment. I walk on a treadmill because why wouldn't you work on a treadmill? I need to wear headphones because I need to defend myself against my coworkers' conversations. I need to wear eye protection because I need to defend myself against my coworkers' Nerf guns. To be fair, I did buy them those Nerf guns, so it's difficult to complain too much. There's hand sanitizer there to defend myself against my coworkers' viruses and other pathogens, and a towel because, of course, a towel.
So what is it that we know or think we know now that we've sort of covered the terminology and some of the background? What we really wanted to do with this talk was give a summary of the data of what is actually known about the conditions of working from home as opposed to working from work. And I'll tell you right now that the take home from this is that the data are thin on the ground, and a lot of them are methodologically flawed, and so we don't know as much as actually, to be honest, we ought to know as we begin to really have workforces that want to work from home. So what we do know is that everyone wants the holy grail for an employee, fast, cheap, and happy. Everybody wants the great employer who's high paying with low friction and good work-life balance. So business schools, corporations who are employers, and social science researchers have been attempting to determine the methods for achieving this holy grail. But as I said, please bear in mind that the research is not at the level you would really hope for. So always start with the epidemiology, which is who gets the disease that you're worried about. So the definitions are of varying quality. Nobody laughed, that was a joke.
Joe's like, you just called my desired lifestyle a disease. And that's how we roll.
So as we pointed out with the problems, even with the term work from home, the definitions are problematic when you look at who are the people who are working from home as well. So in the US, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the most recent data they have on this is from 2004, very recent.
Your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen.
15% of all non-agricultural workers in the US worked from home at least 1 day per week, and that's flat since 2001. Of the people who worked from home, 66% were business, management, or other professionals, which is you all, not me, and 25% had a formal arrangement for work from home. In 2010, so the US Census asks about this at every census, but they get coarser data, and the finest data that they have are those data from 2004. So as of 2010, 10% of people were work from home. In the EU, the most recent data are 2005, so they're a year ahead, and they had 7.5% of their population worked from home at least 25% of the time. So again, hard to compare those exactly. So when people are working from home, what are they doing? Are they working? So this is a survey. This is methodologically not a great survey, but there's actually not a lot of data about this. And if you think about it, it's hard to get somebody to self-report accurately what they actually do. So 43% of people said that they watched TV or movies, and 20% played video games. And just to be clear, if you were a parent of children, you were more likely to answer that you did those two things while you were working. 24% of people had a drink, a quarter of them took a nap, more than a quarter of them did household chores, and almost 30% made dinner. It's still probably a good use of time. Dinner has to be made. It's kind of boring. You might as well be working while you're doing it. We know that interleaving or pipelining tasks hides latency, and almost everyone works when they're cooking dinner anyway.
Beth, were there any questions on that survey that you would have added?
As a gynecologist, there were other things I would have been curious about people doing while they're working from home, but those were not asked.
Those questions were not asked. To be fair, so this is one of the slides that I worried people would think we're bashing on working from home. Let me be clear. Among this list, these, unlike reading from the slide, these are the things that I've done at work. Watched TV or movies, played video games, had a drink, took a nap. I've never done household chores. Oh, well, like phone calls to make a dentist appointment for the kids all the time. So, it's really hard to squeeze the work in at work. So, yeah, and just to be clear, all of that doesn't mean people were not productive at home. It just means all that other stuff is happening too.
So does it work? This is actually one of the most important and one of the most robust studies that's been done to look at this, and it's pretty famous if you use a search engine on the web and you are looking for data about this, you will come across this study. It's not really a fun study to read, so I will summarize it for you. So this was a group of Stanford researchers who studied Chinese call center workers. This study is randomized, although it's not perfectly randomized, and it is a crossover design. So they got 10,000...
Don't use the science terms, you're just confusing them. Stop it.
They used 10,000 Chinese call center workers who volunteered to be randomized to either work from work, or everyone had been working, or work from home. When they randomly assigned them, they found that the people who were assigned to work from home had 13% higher productivity. They were more happy, they were more satisfied. They had a nearly 50% lower promotion rate. After they did that, the crossover design was to say, okay, now we've randomly assigned you, everybody choose. So when people got to choose, half of each group chose the opposite of what they were originally assigned to. So that's really interesting too. And when people were allowed to choose whether they worked from work or worked from home, they increased productivity by 22%. So there are a couple of really important take-homes here. One of them is that it seems to be true that people can actually make good decisions about what the work environment is that works well for them, and that we should think about letting people have that choice. Because even when people who wanted to work from work worked from home, that was a less happy environment for them than when everybody got to choose. As an aside, especially for people who live in the more congested areas of the US, that there are interesting community effects that were noted. I mean, 10,000 people in a small city in China is not an insignificant number, and they were able to document lower vehicle emissions, but increased sprawl. So as more people got to work from home, they drove to work less, but they started moving farther away from work and expanding the city.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to a couple of the other findings from this as well. So there's you guys may not have looked at this, but there is a widespread, widely believed adage, which is people are productive when they are working from home, but creative when they are working from work. And those are a little bit overloaded terms. So by productive, I mean when there's a set of defined work or defined tasks, it is believed that people are more efficient at accomplishing those tasks when they're working from home, in general, with some caveats about choice, and some people hate working from home in the Stanford Chinese call center study. And that people are creative, and by creative I mean they are more likely to invent new products, patent new ideas, develop new approaches to solving problems when they're working from work. This is believed. There's some data around this, and the data around this are very weak and confusing. So the first thing around this is that I need to mention, and I know this is an uncomfortable topic for this audience, is that human beings are complicated. And there's another thing that's a little bit difficult for this audience to admit. Culture matters. So most of the work that's been done on this has been done on Americans. That's awesome, but Americans are actually very particular. First of all, they're individualistic, but they get tension and creativity out of working in groups. This is a weird sort of set of cultural predilections that's not universal. So for Americans, Americans do appear to be more creative when they're working in groups. Optimal amounts of creativity are when you work with people you know well enough to trust, and that group tolerates dissent and tolerates friction. So there's a lot of data around diversity, for example, that people who come from diverse backgrounds, gender diversity, racial and ethnic, language diversity, diversity of professional background, diversity of professional experience, difference in approach to solving a problem, that one of the things that you see is that those differences bubble up in tension and conflict. And if the group is able to tolerate that tension and conflict, creative approaches result out of that. This kind of creativity and this kind of tension is less likely to occur in the work from home environment. I don't want to speak to your relationship with your family, because I'm certain that there's plenty of tension there, and perhaps maybe even tolerated. Maybe not. That's you and your shrink's problem. But I think that it is less likely that you will encounter that kind of tension while working over a remote channel. So understanding these dynamics, what are the dynamics that give rise to this kind of tension, tolerated dissent in order to create creativity, is an interesting technological challenge, and we're going to look at that a little bit. Oh, there's one interesting thing to mention. What was the interesting thing to mention there? No, that's fine. We'll deal with that later. Okay, so this goes on to Dr. Prairie gets a coffee machine. So
Finally.
Got a coffee machine. So there's this pretty famous place in Pittsburgh, the McGee Women's Research Institute. They get like 8.6 million arse tons of NIH money, and they do all this research. And they didn't have, and you guys, those of you who work in education know this, like there's no common space, there's no nice lounge, there's no like coffee machine, there's no espresso machines, there's no snacks, there's just like offices and dank hallways and like a water cooler that hasn't been fixed since 1967 or something, right? And like the money in research is like bleeding out right now, so there's no money. But these guys are serious about the science, so they looked at the set of papers done by a famous biomedical institution in Cambridge that's not MIT, Harvard, and they looked at the geolocation of authors' positions in space. And then they cited the significance. And significance is pretty easy in really rigid academic communities, because you can just say how many people cited their talk, right? And that's a pretty good metric of like, was it important? It's not perfect, but it's decent. And so the talks that are the most important are the talks with the highest number of intra-building collaborators. And there were some buildings, like individual buildings, that were just like producing all the most significant papers because they had the most collaboration within the building. So the McGee Women's Research Institute saw this and they're like, all right, we just got to pony up for a coffee machine. And they got a coffee machine. It's pretty good. Thanks, Harvard. So the last thing I want to point out is, so there's a widely cited study. So there's this set of evidence that looks like, in general, most people are more productive at defined tasks at home. Most people are more creative and innovative at work, but not universally, with some exceptions. And then there's like the business press is full of this particular study that says, aha, it's not the case. People can be more creative at home too and under these circumstances. The reporting, so not surprisingly in the social sciences, the reporting about the study is bad, but the study itself is pretty bad too, so it's kind of a wash as to whose fault it is that this doesn't make any sense. What the study actually shows, and this is really important, is that less structure, and by structure we mean organizational structure and communication structure, promotes creativity. And in the particular groups that they looked at, the people working from home happened to have less organizational and communication structure in their work environments while they were working on tasks that involved innovation or creativity. And so they were more innovative and creative. But it doesn't actually, when you take those same kinds of less structured communication and organizational environments and you put them on work from work, then those people get creative again also. So it turns out the study is useful, but not for any of the reasons anybody who has been popularizing it say it was.
So I want to go back to one of the points from the Stanford study on the Chinese call center workers, which is like, so you kiss your career goodbye. Remember that they were 50% less likely to get promoted when they worked from home. And I am really genuinely sorry to tell you that this is one of the single most robust pieces of data that's come out of this research, in that everyone who's looked at this, without exception, has showed the same effect. So people who work from home, and remember again though that these definitions vary across studies, do not get promoted as often. When they do get raises, their raises are smaller than comparable people in their organizations who work from work. And words that turn out to be important when you're being evaluated include dependable, responsible, and committed. And people who worked from home had people evaluating them use those specific terms and terms like them less often. This presents some pretty significant management challenges. So work from home necessitates specific, objective, results-oriented measures of performance. But even that may not be enough to counter FaceTime bias. And I know that a lot of people kind of feel like that FaceTime bias is because my boss is a dumbass, right? Like, my boss just can't understand sort of a good way to rate my productivity or do what needs to be done to deal with work from home. And we're going to talk about some data that say, unfortunately, it's not just your boss. There is some special sauce, and there are actually researchers across a broad range of disciplines trying to figure out what that is, about us physically meeting each other and physically being present in the same space. So there's a really good meta-analysis out there that looks at these data all together. You know, a meta-analysis is when you take all the papers and you do actually pretty fancy statistical measures on all of their results to try to figure out what's a true way to interpret all of the data together using math.
Wait, like math?
Math.
Seriously?
It's like math. It's just like math.
I'm out of here.
So work from home did have a persistent small beneficial effect on certain proximal outcomes, reduced work-family conflict, and people said that they felt more autonomous. Job satisfaction, performance, and turnover intent, but not actual turnover, are improved with work from home, and role stress, which is this really specific sort of sociologic measurement, were improved. And then people who worked from home greater than 2.5 days a week had more challenging coworker relationships. And the data, so at the end of a meta-analysis, you kind of get to say, like, the quality of the data that my results are based on is like good, mediocre, or bad, and these data are mediocre. So basically, it's a wash.
So given all of that, So we're at the situation where we think there are some advantages for work from home. People are happier in some ways. They may be slightly more productive if they're given the choice to work from home and want to work from home. But relationships with coworkers are more challenging, and creativity and innovation might suffer. But some people still really want to work from home. So we decided to say, OK, set aside the data about what works and what doesn't. What do we know that improves the chances of it working well? So this is this is available in the data, and all things outside of your field can be learned at a dinner party. So we went to a dinner party with David Anderson, who's in Pittsburgh, and a bunch of you know him. And there was Justine Cassell, who does she's the head of the Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and Erica Fuchs, who does research on innovation. So we're like, this is awesome, since we don't really know anything about this, which makes it pretty questionable why we're here talking to you. But anyway, bygones. We're like, could you guys?
The food was really good, too.
The food was freaking fantastic. Good wine. There were a cute little baby to look at for a little while. It was really entertaining. I'm sorry you guys missed it, actually, now that I think about it. In any case, we're like, so tell us what you know. And we got a bunch of pointers. And we looked at the research. So here's the things that work much, much better. Having a policy. And we're going to talk about who has a policy. Initial in-person interaction doesn't look like it's a good idea. It looks like it's more or less essential for two reasons. One of them is that it significantly improves trust, and trust is something that you need in order to tolerate dissent, and dissent and disagreement is something you need to do anything innovative or creative. So you got to have that. But the other reason is that, and we all don't like to admit this, relationships that are initially and primarily electronic are easily discarded. People, actually, we just don't care about them that much. There may be people that you've chatted with daily on IRC for 10 years, and if you stop talking to them, it really won't hurt your feelings that much. And you might even forget that you used to talk to them a lot. And it's this feature of us as human beings. So that looks like it's pretty important. Good communication, and good communication means frequent communication and different modes of communication. Having objective performance metrics, that one's pretty obvious, right? Shared interests with different skills. We're working towards the same thing, but we have radically different ideas about how to get there and radically different approaches and strengths in accomplishing that. There's this really amusing, there needs to be the perception of balanced effort, but you don't actually need balanced effort. You just have to convince everyone that everyone's pulling their weight. And that's sort of management jujitsu. You just do a Jedi mind trick and you're like, we are all equal. And then it's fine, which is weird. And you need the right people. So some people, and this may have been like one of the impacts of the Chinese call center study, some people may just be like home organization or constitutionally or attention-wise incapable of working from home effectively. And so some people are obviously better at this than others. So, okay, work from home. You've got to have a policy, right? It's good to have a policy. So we said, well, like, who's got policies? Because we know, like, show of hands, how many people here work from home at least 2.5 days a week? All right, see, so like, you guys, how many people here work for a company that has a policy describing how you work from home? See, that's what I'm talking about. Like, this is like, it went down to 10%, by the way, right? So we're like, okay, who's got a policy? What's going on here, right? So we started looking. So there's one pretty large company that famously changed their practices, although it's not clear what their former policy was, and it's not actually clear what their current policy is on working from home, and that's sort of what started people rethinking about this stuff. Google fairly famously has very few people working from home, but some people do. There are actually a small number of people who work from home, and there's a pretty medium-sized number of people who work from remote. In other words, they work at a Google facility, but they work primarily with people that are not at that facility. So it's difficult to judge where that fits in the data. Cisco, I mean, so Cisco's got a bunch of stuff about this, and like, love them to death, but all of their stuff about this is about selling gear. They're like, and selling software, and so it's really difficult to get any value out of anything they publish here, because they're like, you should buy some stuff from us, and it'll be great. And like, of course you should buy some stuff from them, as long as they keep sponsoring NANOG. You should just keep doing that. But there's nothing in the stuff that they publish to help you figure out what works or even exactly what their policy is. IBM's been claiming for about 10 years that they're on this aggressive, everybody work from home all the time. They're like claiming carbon credit stuff about this. They're claiming 40% work hours are done remotely. That's awesome, but they roll in their entire sales force into that number. And so now I don't know what to do with that, because if you had a bunch of people who were never working at the office anyway because they're outside salespeople, how much of a change is this really? It's awesome that they have good technology around that, but it's not clear that they're taking traditional, collaborative, technology and engineering tasks or management tasks and moving them remotely. But the punchline, though, is almost all of the technology industry lets some of the best people they like the most work from home with no policy and just kind of calls it good until it's not. And that, as we've shown, is pretty mediocre. So, you want to cover conclusions?
Sure. So people who primarily work from home seem to be less likely to get promoted. Like, I'm really sorry to deliver that news, but that really does seem to be true, and clearly we need to do something about that. But they also seem to be more productive. At least when they are Americans, they may have less creative solutions. And if anyone's interested in those data, those studies are fascinating. I would be totally happy. The studies are footnoted in here, so you could go read them yourself, or you could ask me about that or anything else at the break.
There's a lot of footnotes.
They seem to be happier with family, but they're not necessarily happier in general. But the data are kind of crummy, and so we don't really know. So what are the real things to take home? Meeting people in person is really important, and we don't know why. And your boss needs to see your face. If you want to get promoted, you need excellent, excellent communications infrastructure to do this. Diverse teams still do way better, and explicit policies are probably a good idea, but very few people have them.
Just a quick clarification, in case people are confused. This is not what diversity looks like. I just didn't want anybody to misunderstand that. All right, irrational exuberance, questions? Oh, good.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
here
man.
it comes.
Rock and roll. People are bored with this.
Wow, I actually even fell off the stage. Got so excited about this.
Hi, this is Will Hargrave with British Airways Executive Gold and Hilton Platinum. So there's a subset of people who obviously we've established do not actually have an office to work from. Have you done any research or work on the people in this industry who do not actually have a home to work from and actually work from, their primary work mode is work from conference or work from airplane?
This is a specific hat tip to Martin.
I don't wish to comment on that.
No one, so let's be clear, the actual data here don't even distinguish between people who work from an office with a different work group and people who work from an office with their own work group, so no.
But I would say if you're gonna work from your airplane, you should show your face to your boss once in a while, and you should try to have coffee with the people on your team once in a while, even if it's at a conference.
Yep.
Joe Provo from a travel company.
Will, please continue working from the airplanes and everywhere that you work from. Please book your flights.
How would we book our flights?
There's this lovely, Joe Provo, ITA Software by Google, there's this lovely tool, Matrix, and actually this beautiful integration of flight stuff on maps, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, promotional thing out of the way. Speaking of promotion, you had hinted that there was additional data other than just call center drones that did not get promoted by not being seen by their 19th century factory mentality managers. Is there actual, relevant to this crowd data? Or, it hinted, I didn't see it in any of the footnotes.
So it depends on what you consider relevant. Like, not to be obnoxious. No, truly, we could not find any data that actually looked at you guys. So if there are any graduate students, I don't know, in the audience.
Where are the graduate students?
I definitely wanted to encourage Dr. Prairie to continue this work, because, not the least of which, because then we get to see her more often, and that'd be awesome. Another variable that's worthwhile considering is in the work from work thing, other than the other teams. Open plan versus standard office space would be an interesting variable to include in this future work.
Yep.
That's a great idea.
Ted.
Interesting talk.
Who are you?
Ted Seeley, Sprint. Sorry, Dave. Is there any data from this that shows by industry type or sector, whether it's Fortune 50, Fortune 100, how this work from home thing distributes across those guys? Because I'm curious, is this a tech industry-centric thing that you're looking at, or is it across the board?
I really appreciate the fact that you guys are giving these researchers a little bit more credit than is actually due to them. No, I really, right? Very obvious question. I wish we had the answer. No, so it's a mess. These studies are a mess because people don't have consistent definitions. They're not consistently looking at the same worker populations. But I will tell you, there are a couple of papers that are cited that are looking at professional workers, but none of them look specifically at, IT workers. But I think that the professional worker ones are sort of the closest you can get. And no, they don't break it down by sort of Fortune 50, Fortune 500. The problem with that in part has to do with the way business school research and employer sort of research gets done. So there are, for example, white papers released by corporations who studied their own people. You read those and you think like, I feel like you didn't tell me everything, right? And I think they probably don't. So the data are just not that great in terms of what's out there now. Again, a call to the graduate students in the audience, wherever you are.
Thank you.
At work.
If I was Juniper, one of the things I have to question is when the conclusions being bad is people work from home are not necessarily as promoted as much. If we go way back, to a book called The Peter Principle, we know that people tend to get promoted to their level of incompetence. And one of the things that can be observed for people that are in industries that can support working from home is that does that company have or have not a technical track versus a managerial track? Because typically what promotion means after a certain point in most companies is you get pushed up to management. And that's not necessarily where people have their skills and where they can do the best job.
Yeah, no, it's a sound point. We did not mean to imply that either getting promoted or making more money were universally desired or positive. The point is to highlight that this appears to be a fairly firm outcome of spending most of your time remotely. If it turns out you're happy with your salary and you live somewhere like cheap and it's good for you and your lifestyle and your family, and you don't feel the need to get promoted, then like, full disclosure, you're all set, right? So yeah, no, it's a fair point, and we should have hit that harder. Thanks.
Matt Poundset, Affiliates.
Can you justify your crack smoking mayor first? No, I'm just
I keep telling you, we keep trying to get rid of him, but he just won't go. Yeah.
Please succeed.
So there are a couple of studies out there that are sort of might be peripherally related to this that I've seen that look into problem solving and creativity as related to concentration and interruption. So my own personal experience from this is that working from home, I actually get a lot more creative work done because I don't get somebody wandering by my desk every 10 minutes to say hi or to ask a random question or whatever. That stuff all goes into email. And when I'm done solving the problem I'm working on, then I can go and check on that. And I find that type of stuff becomes way more productive when I'm trying to figure out a problem in some code or do a design work or anything like that. And I'm kind of curious if you guys came across anything related to that when you were working on this.
That was, to be honest, that's part of why, although the pictures that we put in of where we're working right now are kind of funny, that's part of why we put them in. Actually, if you look at my work from home environment, I have many fewer distractions than Todd has at his work from work environment, and that's true. I would tell you, the answer on the creativity thing is a long answer, and I'm not gonna delay everyone's coffee with the long answer, but I would love to talk to you about it because the data on the creativity stuff are fascinating. And so, yes, I can tell you, having been an intern and a resident, that there's robust data from studying us about interruption and the way in which our capacity to problem solve goes right down the tubes. When you interrupt me every 15 seconds, my pager goes off, right? Yeah. So that is true, but the creativity part is
they really do use pagers. I'm not kidding. Go ahead. Sorry, you said pager, and they were like, what? She said pager. What is a pager? Sorry, go on.
But the creativity stuff is a little bit more complicated, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that in detail.
All right, thanks.
The only other thing to point out and to remember, and this may be obvious to you guys, is that intra-group differences massively outweigh the inter-group differences. Human beings are complicated, and there's a huge range of behaviors. This is like when people look at gender differences, and they're like, women are X and men are Y, and you're like, there's a 1% difference at the peaks and massively overlapping curves, right? This is just like that. There are some people for whom this doesn't apply, and your anecdotes will fit into these curves somewhere.
Randy with the last question.
Randy Bush, IIJ. This was really good, thank you. But I've got to say something, which is I'd like to ask David and the audience why they find the profession of gynecology more amusing than Router Geek, and why people laughed at what I thought was a rather obnoxious comment.
I'm not in the audience, and I'm not Dave, but I'm going to say I think gynecology is kind of funny. Like, I've been a gynecologist for, I'll just say, a long time now, and we all kind of think it's funny. I think it's good to have a sense of humor about what you do for a living, and to be honest, I sometimes take care of people in life or death situations, and at the end of the day, I have to be able to laugh about it, or I'm not going to get through it.
And Randy, I have an immense amount of respect for the work that Beth does, and for all gynecologists around the world for that matter. I consider her a friend, and I apologize if our playful banter was offensive, but that was in no way meant like that. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, folks.
Thank you.
Real quick, a couple of